I'm Jan Gibbons,
And I'm Bob Gibbons.
and we'd like to welcome you to the Confessions of a Recovering Landlord podcast, where we let you in on the secrets commercial landlords would prefer you didn't know. As always, we're brought to you by Riata Commercial Realty, where we exclusively represent users of office and warehouse properties. Landlords have representation. Do you?
That would be me.
Okay, today's topic is kind of interesting. The catchphrase is feels like the new retail. And the item they are referencing is older office buildings. Okay, this is a conundrum. Flesh it out for us.
Well, I mean, the big issue here is that we've been waiting for the results of COVID to get to the point where buildings are being foreclosed. And so that really hasn't been happening. So
we've been hearing about it.
Well,
we're not seeing it in our zip code.
Well, but we're really not seeing it in the whole country for the most part. And so it's been interesting because when you look at the fundamentals of office with, high vacancies and lower demand and lots of sublease space, I mean, it's the perfect situation for there to be a lot of foreclosures. However, as we've mentioned before, lenders don't want the buildings back. But I'll go even further than before in the setup here. The vast majority of the absorption, new demand for office space has been in the Class sector. And in fact, in the Dallas
Class
Fort Worth,
A plus, I'd like to say.
And in the Dallas Fort Worth area, the rental rates for Class A has actually gone up 5%. It's the first time we've seen a real increase in rental rates since COVID started. But that's because a lot of that activity is going on with brand new buildings that are just coming out of the ground. In fact, there's a couple of buildings that I've read about recently that are 100% full. And they're brand new buildings and, they're 100% full. And those buildings are commanding really, really strong rental rates. So that's why there's the increase. However, that doesn't apply to all the different kinds of buildings or in every single location. So while it's strong in Dallas Fort Worth for Class A buildings, well, Class B properties would only be so lucky. And
it's the bride and the bridesmaids.
Well, and it's also a function of some of the migration patterns. The Sun Belt has been the big beneficiary of a lot of the migration. And so when you look at some of the—
Is that what we're calling it? Beneficiary? Because when I'm on the road with 9,000 of my closest friends in the same lane, I'm not calling them a beneficiary.
those folks brought their greenbacks to spend. So
I have to remember that.
Could be worse. But anyway, whenever people start moving from the really high cost markets into the Sunbelt cities, well, it's no wonder that the Sunbelt cities are doing well and some of the higher cost markets are not, especially when you get into the lower class buildings. So the thing that was interesting is that there was a report this week that was talking about how the Class B properties in Chicago and New York City are not being foreclosed by the lender so much as the owners are handing the keys back to the lenders. So it's kind of an interesting
come and get it
reversal of what you would expect. Most owners don't want to let go of the buildings that they own, but every now and then they might realize, hey, it's better to get rid of them, get them off my books, et cetera, than to keep this going. Now,
but if you read in what the article that we're referencing, it's interesting because some of those are getting flipped before they've even really taken possession of the building. The bank is reselling it so fast before it's even really the closing.
Well, what's actually happening there is that somebody's buying the note from the bank, from the lender. And then now, so if they see that there's some
interest,
value in there, so some of those might occur. But anyway, let's kind of go back a little bit. So malls giving back property. Simon gave back the keys to its lender for an Atlanta area mall in February of 2021, so a year plus ago. and Brookfield gave back their deed for a mall in Atlanta. So, you know, but that's malls. I mean, malls were dying before COVID
I was going to say
started, right?
that COVID was the death knell for that, but they were already on hospice.
Yeah, well, and that's why, you know, in this article, they kind of try to connect it to retail, saying that office is the new retail in that regard. And really, it's not all retail; it's more mall retail. But in any case, there was a building in Chicago that was 1.4 million square feet on West Jackson that got given back to the lender, and that had fallen into delinquency. There's another building on South LaSalle, saying that the most likely resolution for the loan was the owner handing over the keys, and really what we're talking about is it's called a deed in lieu of foreclosure.
Mhm.
So if the lender initiates this, it's a foreclosure. If the owner says, "Hey, I'm just going to deed the building over to you, lender," and you don't actually have to go through the foreclosure process, then that's called a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Because like in Texas anyway, if you go through foreclosure, well, that's on the courthouse steps on the first Tuesday of each month. And the lender can be there to quote, bid on the building. And, but then anybody else can show up and say, "Hey, I want that building too." And so that you can end up with a bidding war on the courthouse steps. Doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen occasionally. And so there is that possibility. Now, if somebody outbids the lender, well, the lender gets made whole. They're happy, and they don't have to take ownership of the building. So that's a good thing for the lender, but that doesn't happen a great deal. Blackstone, they gave back the keys on a 621,000 square foot, 26-story office tower. So that was in New York. There was a UK investment firm that turned over ownership of a 24-story tower in New York on 42nd Street that it had acquired in 2012. So, you know, there's these kind of things that are happening, and, you know, higher cost markets, right? New York, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, you know, all those lost 700,000 residents between July 2020 and July 2021, whereas Houston, Dallas, Phoenix, Atlanta, and Austin combined gained 300,000 residents. So that's where it goes back to that movement to the Sun Belt we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I just, it's interesting because we were talking about home prices the other day and how they've just skyrocketed here, but they still don't touch what people are dealing with elsewhere. So I think a lot of these people, to kick it back into the commercial real estate realm, I think people come from Manhattan where they paid, you know, X dollars a square foot for a 12 by 12 room, and they come down here and get palatial for half the price. That's going to help keep driving office rents up in the DFW area because these people are willing to pay because it's still a good deal for them.
Well, and it was also interesting in this article, they were referring to what percentage of the overall market for what we call special servicing, which is when a loan gets put into sort of the
naughty pile.
I like that best, the naughty pile. So for the commercial mortgage-backed securities, CMBS is 11% of the $8 billion of CMBSs that are in special servicing in February. 11% of that was in Chicago. So, or 11% of what's in Chicago was in special servicing versus 3.1% nationally.
I wonder how that compares to New York. You got to think New York's taken a huge hit too.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, they didn't give us that stat, but I thought that was interesting. There was 11% versus 3%. That's nearly 4 times the amount. And, you know, and this article is kind of saying that a lot of that is just cold weather, high cost market. And therefore people aren't wanting to stay there as much.
I also think it's blue versus red. It's a highly taxed area. We have much more pro-business, live and let live down here.
Yeah, I'll go with you on the pro-business and the tax thing. I'm not sure that you can chalk it up to blue versus red, because virtually every major city in America is blue now. So now the suburbs are not, and the overall state may not be, but the actual metro area is, or city center area is anyway. But New York
Yeah,
and
and that's a classic case here, because you would say Dallas proper is blue, but it's
yes,
surrounded by a tsunami of red. And so what's happening? You can get a screaming good deal in CBD right now, but you come up here to North and prices are holding firm. So
well,
I still think it's the migration from the highly regulated, highly taxed areas to a more pro-business area, even within the same state.
yeah, maybe. I guess I'd have to see a lot more data to know how to
Or you could just take
respond.
my word for it.
That seems like the safer plan for me. uh, one of the things also interesting about this, New York and Chicago combined had more than 720 million square feet of office space that is considered old and obsolete, basically. Obsolete, and they don't have, the modern tenant requirements of all the amenities and stuff. So, you take that kind of inventory and say, it's really not something that people want anymore. And that puts that city at those cities at a big disadvantage, because now you have those things sitting there. People don't want to be in them. I mean, it's like, sadly, it's the Empire State Building in New York. I've heard that one has been foreclosed. I don't remember exactly when, but because it's so empty, people aren't wanting to be there anymore.
Well, the thing that's kind of frustrating to me is I get the feeling when you say tenant requirements, we're really talking what we used to call amenities, and you're now calling them requirements. An LED building that has all the latest gizmos with the air system.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading this one about this building that they're redoing or building from scratch in Manhattan that's going to have 6,000 square feet of a sky lounge, 8,000 square feet of a fitness center, and 9,000 square feet for rotating food vendors. And that they're also providing a golf simulator. Well, if you stop and think about it, I have all those things in my home on a little bit smaller scale, but I can
A
walk in my
lot
kitchen
smaller.
and have anything I want to eat. I've got a gym. I can walk outside and look at my lounge area, and I can hit golf balls back there. This
Yeah.
is what people are trying to do to attract people out of their homes, is to build them a new home.
Well, except that in a building, you're doing it with people around, and at home, you're
That's
doing it by
true.
yourself, and that's not
And
as
it's
much
maintained by
fun.
someone else. I get that.
Well, in that building you're talking about in Manhattan, that's actually a renovation of a 27-story tower. And so you're seeing a lot of these buildings that are older trying to keep up with the new buildings. And sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. I think the bigger thing that I see clients really wanting is walkability. They want to be able to park their car in the morning
Live,
when
work,
they get to
play.
the office and not have to leave to go get something to eat, and especially something to eat. So buildings that don't have, they're not big enough to have food service, they're doing things like getting food delivery services. And there's one called Fuda, there's another one called Foodsby. And, you can, it's almost like Uber Eats, except you see the menu in the morning, you order what you want, they deliver them all around the noon hour. And so it gives them the ability to compete for tenants who want a food service that wouldn't otherwise have it. 10 years ago, those buildings wouldn't have had it because those services didn't exist. So, I think the real game now is for those companies that have decided to keep an office and want to be there. The issue is not just price of the building. It's not rent by itself. It's what's the rent, what's the location, what are the building amenities, is it walkable? What kind of environment am I creating for my employees to attract them and woo them back to the office? And all this stuff about the foreclosures. I mean, that's going to happen. I mean, there are going to be foreclosures throughout the country on a sporadic basis, but not, we haven't seen it on the extent that you would expect given the market conditions.
But I've got to think if it's not foreclosed upon, it's going to have to be refinanced because so many of these large credit tenants are going 400,000 square foot renewal. Yeah. I could use 50
Right.
and to tenant these buildings that had one or two, three major tenants in it. And now you're going to have a Jenga of 50 tenants to make up that square footage. That's a
Yeah, but
lot more work.
it is, but I would argue it's a much safer investment for the landlord at that
I know
point.
you always felt that way when you were on corporate side, but it is a lot more work.
Well, I mean, I'll give you an example. In 1999, I think it was,
Bombity,
or
bombity,
2000, or the year 2000, something like that. The company I was working for at the time on the landlord side bought a building with three, I mean, it had more than three tenants, but three tenants occupied like 90% of the building, and they all expired in the same year. And so in that year, when that came along, two of the three tenants said, see ya, we don't want to be here, because it was in an older building in one of the older submarkets of town where people weren't as interested in being, had declined. And so they left and they went to a much nicer building in a much nicer market. And they were going to end up spending probably 50 to 100% more in rent, on a per square foot basis anyway. And they were totally fine with that. They, it made sense for them to do that at the time. Hey, let's change subjects here. Guess who wants to get in on the freight transportation business?
Well, I'm going to say Richard Branson because I'm not really comfortable saying Virgin, but go right ahead.
What's wrong? Yeah, well, no, I'm glad you didn't say it then. Well, Virgin Hyperloop. I thought this was amazing. Virgin Hyperloop wants to get in on the supply chain and use their battery powered pods to deliver stuff at 670 miles an hour.
Hey, if they can move that old man's body into outer space, I'm fine with them moving my stuff from Amazon to my house. It's fine by me.
Well, I thought this was cool because it says that they're in, and this is again another article I was reading, but it says that the company is in discussions with airports and port authorities around the world to create a pilot program for cargo shipment services. So basically, it would take the cargo from a port or from an airport and move it somewhere. And the hyperloops that have been discussed in the past are part of what they're saying is that it's going to be able to move people a lot faster, a lot safer, more reliably, because it's underground, not above ground, subject to problems with the weather. But the other thing that would be interesting is if you can have things delivered at that kind of speed, you can put warehouses out in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, West Texas, you name it. And theoretically, it will be a much less expensive place to build. I mean, in Dallas, Fort Worth right now, I'm hearing some of the land prices being paid for industrial properties is like $20 a square foot on the land. Whereas in the past, we would hear about, $3 to $5 a square foot, maybe $8 for a really expensive piece of land. So you're taking that number and saying, well, you're going to pay 20. Well, how much less are you going to have to pay to make it worthwhile to move things via the Hyperloop? I mean, I got to believe that's going to be really expensive. But the good news about it is also is going to result in less transportation, or less congestion, I should say, around airports and port facilities. If you get rid of a lot of those trucks, if there's a sort of a direct link from the ship or from the airplane to the Hyperloop, that could really make things a lot better around airports and ports.
Anything that helps with congestion. Are you saying that would also help with truck congestion on I-35?
Well, sure. I mean, if you're having the Hyperloop take it from from the port or airport to a warehouse, I guess it depends on how far the loops go. And it'd be nice if you had that loop going all the way around the country, right? So, but realistically, I mean, you can't have a stop for a Hyperloop at 670 miles an hour in every suburb or every little distribution node. That doesn't make sense.
Well, you could have express check. aisle 3, no waiting. If
You
you
mean
have
like
it,
an express train?
right.
Well,
If
the other,
it's got all the Tesla parts that need to go from Austin to South LA, it makes one stop. But if it's got all these little things that need to stop in El Paso and Tucumcari and all that, then it goes on a separate track.
yeah.
I mean,
Well, I mean, it could also create less pollution from trucks. If it's running on batteries instead of diesel, that could be good. Maybe you're going to have more efficient automation, so better, safer supply chain logistics.
it could keep me out
Even
of prison because I will shoot another truck that gets in front of me when I'm trying to pass and they do it on a uphill. That's just
that's
justifiable homicide.
that's why I drive. Um, Even cross-border shipments. So if let's say something comes into Panama and there's a hyperloop that goes up through Central America to the US, it could cross all those borders from Panama and Guatemala and Mexico into the US. And if it's somehow like sealed and certified or whatever the mechanism is, it could go through all those borders without having to stop, which again could make things far more
Oh,
more
yeah.
quick. So I just thought that was kind of a cool idea. They're based in Los Angeles, and I read that they've already raised $400 million in private funding since they were founded in 2014. That's pretty incredible. People have been
Yeah,
investing
I didn't
400
realize that
million.
he'd been working on it that long.
Well, and I don't know how much he's involved. I mean, Richard Branson's got so many things. Like,
Well,
I'm
it
sure
said
it's
he
just
helped found it. Yeah.
lending his name to it. But
Mhm.
yeah, but I mean, to go for that long and still not have it in actual working order. Although they say in November of 2020, the company carried out the first successful test with human passengers. So that could have been fun.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that was interesting in all this is that there's a Dubai-based global port operator that owns a majority stake in Virgin Hyperloop. So that kind of brings it all back together. It's like, oh, now I understand why this is such a focus, because they're looking for other ways to do this. And there's actually some other companies trying to work on this. There's something called Hyperloop TT, Heart Hyperloop, Transpod, Swisspod, and these are in the US, the Netherlands, Canada, Switzerland. So it appears that there's a lot of activity going on with the Hyperloop thing. So that could result in something pretty good over time.
I just keep thinking of side note. I just keep picturing I can't even think of him now. The funny guy on Elf, Will Ferrell. When he gets into the mailroom and he
Yeah.
gets under that sucky thing. That's what I have pictured for the Hyperloop. It's a pod that's going to go through a sealed tube, just like when
Well,
you go to the bank.
But it's not done by vacuum technology like that. It's done with electromagnets.
Don't know.
Don't stand near the hole when the sucky thing starts.
That's what I'm picturing. You're my best friend.
And keep the Jack Daniels away from jam at the time.
Is it syrup?
All right. We're
going to end on that lovely note.
You want to, anything
But
else
we
you
want to
talk
thank
about?
our sober friends at Riata Commercial Realty who brought us this fueled podcast, because they always represent tenants. And just taking a side note here, explain how you are helping tenants, because we've always focused on leasing, which is still our bread and butter. But as a fiduciary, you always do what's best for your client.
Right.
And I've seen you doing a lot of stuff lately.
Well, like, what are you referring to?
Well, like someone needs to sell their building. So you sell it and get them another lease. Someone needs out of their lease and you sublease it for them. And
Yeah, it
then
does seem
find them
like
something smaller. They decide to go home and be virtual. We leased out their entire space because they never wanted to go home. But once they got home, it was like, oh, this works. So
yeah, I mean, we're here to be a fiduciary to the clients and to do what's best and for them and to support their corporate goals and objectives. So, sometimes that's leasing space. Most often times it's leasing space. Sometimes it's subleasing the space they no longer need. Sometimes it's buying a building. I mean, we run the analysis of lease versus buy all the time. And right now we seem to have more clients wanting to buy than ever, but we also have a couple that are wanting to sell. And fortunately, the ones that wanted to sell were selling industrial flex buildings, which are just going gangbusters. I mean, they're
High
making,
demand.
they're increasing the values by 50 to 100% from the time they bought it. And, you know, that's a
In
beautiful
a short
thing.
period of time, 5 years or less.
Oh yeah. I mean, 5 in one case, 3 in another case. And we have another one that may be coming out that'll end up being 3 or 4 years. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of activity going on there, and the demand is just off the charts. And so yeah, I mean, we'll do whatever makes sense for the client. You know, I will give a little rant here for a second though. We were representing a client and the landlord refused to pay us on a renewal. This was a tenant that was already in the building. This is a new landlord. They're not, you know, they're not investors. They've never owned a building before. They really don't know anything about.
And what was the exposure? What was the usage? It was an office building.
Yeah, it was an office building.
Okay.
And so anyway, you know, we did the deal for the tenant, and at the last minute, the landlord said, "Nah, we're not going to pay you. We're not going to pay anybody on a renewal." And I was just like, "Wow, you guys are nuts," because this is a broker-dominated market. 95% of new deals, 99% of new deals get done with a broker. Renewals not quite as high a percentage, but still very dominant. And, you know, if the word gets out, nobody's going to bring a tenant to them because, you know, my argument to them is that if you, as the landlord, refuse to pay a renewal commission to your tenant's agent, well, number one, you're overcharging your agent. I mean, your tenant, because the rental rate already includes a fee for the tenant to have somebody represent them.
Representation.
And so you're denying them that right if they're not willing to pay for it themselves. And if they do pay for it themselves, now they're paying more than market because you're already charging them. You're already charging them a market fee, and then they have to pay the commission. That means they're paying more than market. And that's just not right. And that's ridiculous. But
well, he may have a vision for the building you're unaware of. Maybe he wants a tenant-free building.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Well, based on what they told me, that's not what their goal is. But anyway, I thought that was ridiculous. And you know,
but how did you handle it?
Well, I told the tenant, this is in your best interest. It's based on, because of where you want to be, because of the goals and objectives you've articulated to us, you should sign this lease. I know I'm not going to get paid. My agreement with that client was that we look to the landlord to get paid, not the tenant. And therefore we just didn't get paid in that situation. And that's annoying and frustrating, but you know, we're a fiduciary to the tenant. So we have to do what's in their best interest, regardless of the economic impact to us. But if they call me back and say, "Hey, we want you to represent us again, and we want to stay right where we are," well, no, I'm not going to spend my time on that because, you know, I'm not going to waste time on something that I can't make a living at. So, you know, this time it was shame on me for not having forced the landlord into signing the commission agreement far earlier. So that didn't come down to that point. But in this particular case, we only had 6 weeks to get the deal done from the time the tenant engaged me anyway. So there really wasn't time to force that given the circumstances. So anyway.
But you did the right thing.
Well,
as always at Riata Commercial Realty.
I was going to say, hopefully I always do, but I know I make mistakes every now and then.
We'd like to thank you for listening to another episode of the Confessions of a Recovering Landlord podcast. Please go to where you pick up these podcasts and give us a 5-star rating. We could use it. We could use a 3-star. We prefer a 5-star, but we'll take 3, 4, or 5.
If you're going to give us a 3-star, don't bother.
Hey, this way we'll know they're listening.
Hey, go check out our website, TexasTenantRep.com. And you can call us at 972-677-0028.
Thanks
Thanks so much.
Bye.